Hello and welcome to Sharing the Light, and I'm Reverend Robert Griffin. Sharing the Light is an online ministry opportunity of the Sunshine Cathedral located here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Today I am joined by Reverend Durrell Watkins, who is the senior pastor of the Sunshine Cathedral here in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm also joined by Reverend Michael Diaz, who is on staff here at the Sunshine Cathedral and is also the coordinator for our Sunshine Cathedral site in Miami. In this segment today, we're going to be asking the question of, can gays pray? So we're going to dive right in as always and get ready to this topic with our senior pastor leading us off, Pastor Durrell.
Well, I wonder why gays or gay and lesbian people wouldn't think they could pray. Probably people who have been told by the church or by their families or by politicians or some segment of society that they are disordered, that they lack sacred value. They probably feel disconnected from God, and so that would be their reason for not praying. So I think the answer to can gays pray is connected to what gays believe about God. So I don't think you can separate the spiritual discipline of praying from sort of the academic work of theology. The academics is a scary word, but for the intellectual work, the thinking, theology is God talk. It's thinking about God, struggling with God issues, talking about God issues. And so I think that if gay people are willing to think about God, and maybe think about God in whole new ways. I mean, the God that you were taught had some issue with your body, who didn't like your body, or didn't like the way you loved, or didn't like your attractions, or didn't like your sexuality, or didn't like that you were sexual. You can't, I don't know that you can ever really come to terms with that God. And so you have to sort of come up with a new image and a new understanding of God. If you're willing to do that work, leading you maybe to non-theistic images of the divine, or certainly different, more friendly images of the divine, if you're willing to do that work, then I think prayer comes naturally as a result from having done that work. That once you sort of make peace with God, once you reevaluate your relationship with God, maybe once you have a new understanding of God, well, then how you sit in the presence of that God is going to be a natural outcome, I think.
How about you, Mike?
I think it's a very bold statement to say we need to reimagine different images for God, especially when we come to prayer. And when you look at historically oppressed groups everywhere, marginalized communities, when you look at liberation theology, it teaches us that if God takes heart in hearing the praises and prayers and thanksgivings of God's people, it would be historically oppressed people. We learn in Exodus. In the Exodus story, when the Israelites are struggling and crying out in the midst of the oppression going on with the Egyptians, that they're crying and expressing their frustrations, and yet God says, I hear your miseries, I hear your frustrations. And so if there's any people that has a place at the table and should pray, should come to God, I would think gays and lesbians, transgender, bisexuals should pray.
What would you say one of the barriers might be that hinders the LGBT people or a community of faith like that from praying? Is it because of past, present, or how they've looked at church before? What is that, if there is a hindrance?
Well, there's sort of a developmental delay, a spiritual developmental delay for gay and lesbian people sometimes. If you were taught that you were innately depraved, that you were innately non-valuable, that you were just sinful and horrible, that your body was bad, that the way you shared your body in relationship with another body was bad, if you were taught that early on and you left religion by 18 or 20 or 22, and you stayed out of that for 10, 20, 30 years, and then you decide to give church one more chance. Maybe you're in crisis, maybe you want community, whatever, so you give religion one more chance. A lot of times, people pick up where they left off. Well, if you have a 19-year-old understanding of God when you're 50, then there's a lot of development that hasn't happened in those in-between years. And so I think one of the things that keeps people from sort of sitting in the presence of God, I don't even care what you say to God. The prayer for me is just sitting, just being in the presence. It can be walking, it can be sitting, it can be kneeling, but just sort of being. And what would keep you from sort of having that sort of contemplative experience of something larger than you that at the same time was part of you, the thing that would keep you from that is this previous understanding. The Apostle Paul said, when I was a child, I thought like a child, but when I became an adult, I put away childish things. I think the challenge for gay and lesbian people is to put away the abusive, mean God of their childhood and develop a more mature, maybe even more sophisticated understanding of divine reality.
Let me ask you both this question. Mike, I'll let you go first. What would you say the joy of prayer is? What brings you joy when you pray?
Bringing joy is being affirmed, I would say. I think gays and lesbians have come to a point where we just don't want to talk about our frustrations and what's ailing us, but we want to be affirmed in who we are. So it's not just about confession all the time and, oh, the sinful being that I am, but being joyful and being able to come to a God or a divine presence and just being affirmed in who you are. You know, knowing that it's a God who loves you, a God who appreciates you, a God who affirms everything that you are and what you do. And just being in that presence is a very joyful thing, I think.
Pastor?
I remember when I was much younger, I never really took a break from religion. When religion got on my nerves, I just tried a different expression of religion. And so I've just sort of innately always been religious. And so I've explored and experimented until I found something that sort of worked for me. But I remember when I had that previous understanding of God, you know, where this is God over here somewhere, way out there in the sky or beyond the sky or out there somewhere, and I'm sort of seeking that God's favor or attention or approval, which is a very needy and sort of childish way to approach it, I think. But when that was my attitude, what was sort of a breaking point for me, I remember very specifically where I said to God one day, to that God that, as I understood in that moment, because I thought that God had trouble with me as who I was, and yet I still yearned to be in relationship with some sort of divine presence. And so I finally, just in frustration, said, you have my permission to strike me straight. You know? And if it's that important to you, fix it now. You know, I just totally gave myself over to that divine will. And apparently the divine will couldn't have cared less, because 2 seconds later I was as gay as when I said it. And so that sort of led me, I think, I must have been in college, and I think that started leading me to a different understanding of what God is. That God isn't this angry, proper, removed sort of aunt or uncle that visits at Christmas, gives you a little gift, but also never quite thinks you're doing well enough. That isn't God. That God is more this source that I'm able to plug into at any time. That it's the ruach of creation, the wind, the breath, the energy of life, the pneuma, the spirit. Jesus breathed on his disciples and said, "Receive this spirit of wholeness." And so this spirit of life, this ubiquitous presence, this energy of life, is now the God of my understanding. And prayer isn't about trying to get that God to approve of me. Prayer is about plugging into that source and letting that God flow through me and express as me, and just to have sort of a silent communion with the source of what I am. And then it's not about am I okay, it's how is God expressing in through and as me. And as a gay person, that's obviously my relationships and my community and my needs and my desires and all that sort of thing.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you both for joining me here today, and I want to thank you for joining us here on Shared Delight. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, please visit us on our website at www.sunshinecathedral.org, or write to me with your questions and comments at robert@sunshinecathedral.org.